Well, welcome to the incredible address here in Washington, D.C. of 101 Constitution Avenue. We've got a great backdrop here. This is our Kemp Forum on Opportunity in the New Digital Economy. My name is Jimmy Kemp, and I love being able to sit down and engage with thoughtful people about the American idea. Our mission at the Kemp Foundation is to advance the American idea, to develop, engage, and recognize exceptional leaders who champion the American idea, which at its root is the human idea. As Speaker Paul Ryan likes to say, the American idea is the reality that the condition of your birth should not determine the outcome of your life. My dad always talked about the human idea being a universal concept that people have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Obviously, the Declaration of Independence described that best. And that's a covenant that was made between our founders and the people. And it's really important to understand as we think about our country and issues that get down in the weeds, like technology and our digital economy, and how we're going to move forward as a leading nation in global economic growth, but having companies that can build the future, which is what America has always been. But as we think about that, it's critical to understand what underpins our ability to deliver that promise and hope. And we believe that that covenant of the American idea, best described in the Declaration of Independence, does that. In addition to that covenant, that promise, there are contracts, there's legislation. But anytime we get into the weeds of contracts, agreements, the legalities of how we're going to structure our society, it's really important to never forget the underpinning promise that this country provides, and that we're one nation under God. So the Kemp Forum series is a platform for the debate and discussion that provides a civil competition of ideas. And today we're excited about the people who've agreed to be here. And to start off, we want to thank the Internet Association, who's partnered in this event with us. And we've got lots of other folks who we will thank throughout the day. But we have Michael Beckerman with us from the Internet Association. We have Bret Swanson and Michael Mandel, who wrote a paper that you'll be hearing more about entitled The Coming Productivity Boom. And I need to apologize up front to Bret. We did make a mistake in your program. If you're looking at Bret's bio, it's not correct. It I think, gives him a PhD, but I'm not sure that's correct. But it's actually somebody else's bio, and I don't know who, so don't ask me. It's from a previous Kemp Forum, and I appreciate your grace with us. But this is going to be a great day, lots of interesting discussions. We want you all to be involved in the conversation, and we'll seek to do that throughout the day. So without further ado, I'm going to come up here and I'll moderate, but we're going to have Michael Mandel from the Progressive Policy Institute start off, and then Bret and then Michael respond as Michael and Bret talk. Oh, we're going to have Bret go first, talking about the coming productivity boom. And the reason why we're having this conference is in no small part because when I read their paper, the phrase that I love that embodies our values at the foundation is that their goal, and they believe that our nation's goal, should be to have economic growth more broadly shared. And that's the purpose, more broadly shared, connecting more people in a way that allows us to achieve our hopes and dreams. So Bret, with the apology for your bio being wrong, I do want to say that Bret started a firm called Entropy Economics. It's an economic consulting firm, and what a great name, Entropy Economics. It recognizes the reality that the world is not as it should be. And how do you study a dynamic world that has phenomenal potential, but also a recognition that it isn't as it should be, and we're trying to make it better. That's what all of us are doing when we engage in commerce. make our life and the lives of others better. He's also a fellow. Are you a fellow at AEI? A fellow at AEI, and writes on the tech blog there regularly. Does lots of other things. But Bret, we're thrilled to have you, and get us started.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Jimmy. It's great to be at the Kemp Foundation. Thank you to the Internet Association. Great to be with my friend Michael Mandel. And I think a lot of us might say that Washington could use a lot more of Jack Kemp these days in a number of different ways. So it's great to be talking about the topics of economic growth and opportunity here, especially as it relates to technology. You know, the last 10 or 12 years have been a tough time for economic growth. If we'd continued on the historical average path of economic growth, around 3% a year, the U.S. economy today would be nearly $3 trillion larger in output. Think about what that means in terms of incomes and jobs across the country. Now, there's no guarantee, there's no natural law that says that we get or allowed to grow 3% every year. It takes a lot of work and so forth. But we've had this sluggish economy. We've had sluggish productivity growth. There are a lot of reasons maybe why we've had this slump. But Michael and I had sort of been thinking along the same lines for a while, thinking about just what are the sources of the sluggish productivity growth. But even more importantly, is innovation over? Is this the new normal? Is this all we can expect for the next decade, for the next 2 decades? You had a lot of people seeing the sluggish growth of the last couple of years. For instance, just one economist named Robert Gordon, who wrote a big influential book, saying that basically we shouldn't expect any faster growth for the next several decades. All the big ideas had been invented, most of the big technologies we've seen, and that, yes, we'll have incremental improvements, but nothing like the era of electrification, nothing like the Industrial Revolution. And that this is all we can expect. On the other hand, you have people at the other end of the spectrum saying that the real problem is that innovation is going so fast, there's too much technology, too many robots, AI, et cetera, taking all the jobs. So how can these two things be true? I think probably neither of them are exactly true, but we can reconcile them. And so what we looked at, we divided the economy into 2 big buckets. The digital economy, which is about 30% of the economy, that's tech, content, media, finance, professional services. And then the rest of the economy, which is about 70% of the economy. Everything else, healthcare, education, transportation, manufacturing, retail, logistics, et cetera. And what we found was that there's really a reason for these 2 diametrically opposed views of why some people see so little innovation, some people see so much. It's because the digital economy has been growing fast. It has been innovating. It has been rapidly increasing in productivity. So the companies of Silicon Valley, companies in media, companies in finance, we have seen lots of productivity growth. It's the companies in the rest of the economy that have really, we've seen the concentration in the productivity slowdown. And the other thing that we found was that the companies that are the 30% of the digital economy make 70% of all information technology investments. The 70% of the economy, what we call the physical economy, makes only 30% of information technology investments. So what this led us to believe was that this 70% of the economy is, you could say, underperforming. It has not taken advantage of, exploited, leveraged the amazing power of Moore's Law and the internet and mobile technologies and the coming Internet of Things and so forth. And that if we could get healthcare and education and transportation and manufacturing and energy and retail and distribution to adopt the technologies that the fast-growing parts of the economy have already adopted, we could see a substantial productivity boom in the bulk of the economy that would produce overall economic growth closer to that 3% long-run average, which means trillions of dollars in larger GDP growth, faster income growth, better jobs for more people. And the key, addressing Jimmy's point, is that because a lot of these digital industries tended to be concentrated on the coasts, California, New York, et cetera, that's why you saw a lot of growth and income growth, et cetera, in these areas, and why the rest of the country seemingly did not prosper as we saw all this innovation around us. But we think that as the rest of the economy, these other industries, these more traditional industries, now do leverage the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, 5G mobile networks to propel transportation and logistics and healthcare into a new era, you're going to see more broadly based economic growth in more industries, in more firms, in more regions for more people across the country. That's the big idea of our paper, and we talked a lot about in the paper, not just the macro data, but also gave a bunch of examples of how particular industries could leverage these information technologies to do better. And Michael recently has been focusing on one area that I think is really exciting, where we're actually seeing this in action.
So let me just take a couple of minutes to sort of fill in behind Bret's really good presentation. First, I'm honored to be here at the Kemp Forum. It's very appropriate. I work at the Progressive Policy Institute. You know, you could basically say what we believe in is growth with an expanding winner's circle, which is exactly what you said. And it's important to sort of realize that when Bret and I started on this project, we thought of it as I don't even think of bipartisan, but it was, you know, we actually understood that we, despite being nominally on different sides of the political aisle, we could see that we shared a lot of views, and that there was actually, that it wasn't going to be difficult to write a piece together on this. Now, one thing that we're seeing right now is we're starting to see the penetration of information technology and the internet into the physical industries. Most importantly, the place where it's happening, the clearest place right now, is e-commerce. E-commerce, retail for many years was stuck in the mud, that people working in retail, brick and mortar retail, did the same thing that they were doing 20 years ago. They were reshelving inventory, they were watching for pilferage, they were checking people out. The jobs hadn't changed, and even worse, the wages hadn't changed. And then, you know, what happened is that e-commerce in recent years has transformed retail, has transformed logistics, and what's happened is that it's led to higher wages for workers. Workers in fulfillment centers earn 30% more than brick and mortar retail workers in the same area. It's resulted in better service for consumers, and it's resulted in growth in places that haven't seen it for 15 years. So it's spread out to places like Indiana, Ohio, Tennessee, Kentucky, and then it's sort of spreading everywhere. And then the next step here is that the transformation of logistics has the potential for creating a manufacturing boom as well. Right? This is something that I sort of wrote about in a recent Wall Street Journal op-ed. And the fact of the matter is, as information technology permeates out to manufacturing, which oddly enough it has not up to this point, the internet, you know, I was recently, you know, you talk to manufacturers and you ask them if they have a digital strategy, and they kind of go, not really. Okay, and so what's going to happen is that as manufacturing gets transformed, we're going to actually start seeing a growth in manufacturing at home as well. And you know, yesterday the Bureau of Labor Statistics released their 10-year projections of employment, and they've got manufacturing continuing to shrink. That's just wrong, right? As what we've learned from the e-commerce example is that applications of information technology, applications of the internet, don't cost you jobs, they actually increase jobs. That's what we've seen in e-commerce. E-commerce has generated many more jobs than have been lost in brick and mortar. I'm going to stop right here to sort of give, you know, to I think that we've kind of said enough. If you want to sort of learn more, you can go look at, if you just do a search for the coming productivity boom and Bret and my name, you will find 10,000 copies of this document on the internet. This is an optimistic view of the future, and actually, since we put it out in March, there's been just a tremendous amount more that we've done on this, and that this is what I think what we're going to see is that this is actually, we've passed through the nadir. Okay, we've passed through the pendulum. We've had quite a few years that were not good, and I think we're sort of heading on to a bunch of years that are going to be very good.
So, Michael, the optimistic coming productivity boom obviously is significantly impacted by the members of the Internet Association. How do you react to that? I'm guessing it's going to be positive, but can you add to what they're saying and give your perspective?
I mean, first of all, I think this is a very interesting and timely conversation, but it's one that we're still in the very early days. And so, as they're talking about the digital economy and parts of the economy that are not yet there, I'm confident that, maybe the next time we have this conversation, it'll just be the economy, and you'll understand that the digital internet aspect of it penetrates everything in a positive way that has increased productivity, more competition for individuals, better quality of life, higher wages, all these positive things as the digital internet economy seep into the rest of the economy and become a standard part of it. But we are in the early days. I think largely when you look at some of the data, a lot of the positive impacts haven't yet been reflected there because some of the questions are being asked are maybe 20th century economic questions. And as you're looking at traditional industries like transportation, certainly that's one where, how many people came here in a traditional taxi versus Lyft or Uber? Yeah, so everybody probably takes Lyft and Uber, so that's one area where that's an industry that hasn't changed for many years and now is very much digital and is creating opportunities for people all over. The same thing is happening for healthcare. Manufacturing maybe will be a slower one. Education, I think, is going to be the next wave also of improvement for everybody. And on the question of winners everywhere in the economy, a lot of the winners that are right in front of our face, it's so obvious that you don't see it. In every state across the country, in every single community, there are small businesses in traditional industries from retail to others where they're able to create a global business or compete with some of the bigger players in ways they weren't able previously because of efficiencies that exist in the digital economy, from advertising to reaching consumers to so many other things. And I think being able to take a very local, previously business and put it on a global scale because of the digital internet economy is something that is going to be incredibly transformative for us and people in every single state.
So I worked with my dad from 2003 to 2009. We had a consulting company called Kemp Partners. And in 2007, I remember Dad wrote a piece on the idea of taxing the internet and internet companies. And he started it off by quoting, I think, his favorite president, certainly one who he knew best, President Reagan. And President Reagan said that government tends to, when it sees something move, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it finally stops moving, subsidize it. That cycle is obviously one we don't want to perpetuate. And that was the basis for my father's argument to not tax the internet and the commerce that's being generated from that. Obviously, that was 2007. We've got lots of issues today around this. Where do you three look at where the potential is going for the internet to do a lot of positive things and be at the core of economic growth? Where is policy holding back the innovation that stands to provide so many jobs and such opportunity?
Yeah, just to lay out the amazing story of the last 20 years. So over the last 20 years, we've had about $1.6 trillion in investment in broadband networks, fiber optics, mobile broadband networks. The companies from Silicon Valley and elsewhere now are making enormous tens of billions of dollars of investments in building the cloud infrastructure, building these data warehouses that serve all of our apps. So this has been a tremendous story of beginning to build this infrastructure. But now for the next era where we want these technologies to go into all these other sectors, one, I think we need to maintain a lot of the good policies that we've had in this area, which basically said, you know, yes, invest, we want you to go for it, experiment, try new things. But we're going to have to think about some policies, for example, for healthcare. Data provides huge opportunities in healthcare, but it's a tricky subject because of the privacy concerns in healthcare, right? So how do we get the innovation that a data-driven healthcare system can give us while protecting consumer privacy? So getting that balance right, that's one among many questions. You know, there are going to be a host of policy questions concerning driverless cars, autonomous vehicles. We're working on that. I think we want to, my view, is err on the side of innovation. This is a sector that has been tremendously successful at spreading opportunity. I think the bigger risk is that we step in and close off opportunity. Not to say there aren't going to be tricky issues. The other thing that I'll mention is I think tax reform is really important here. If you've looked at the financing mechanism of tech has been has enjoyed a huge venture capital market, right? And then even though the IPO market has been closed down, they can startups can go sell to the big Silicon Valley companies. The rest of the economy, manufacturers, companies across the middle of America, the last 10 years, financing has been tough, bank loans, and there's been no IPO market. I think tax reform will be especially important for companies that have lower margins and don't have that sort of venture capital basis.
I'm just going to say a word at this point about competition policy, which is going to be one of the areas that is going to be heavily fought out in the 2018 election and the 2020 election. And I think we have to be really careful to make sure that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater here. The way that I think about it is, if we were going to do competition right, policy right, you look for the industries, you sort of judge the different industries on what sort of price increases they have and what sort of productivity increases. And if you really want to eliminate the bottlenecks in the economy, you look for the industries that have been increasing their prices and have slow productivity growth. And that's not the internet companies, okay? And I think we have to kind of think about this in a kind of a neutral sense of what are we trying to accomplish? Well, we're trying to get the economy moving. All right, let's actually sort of take a step back and sort of assess the different industries on a neutral scale and decide which ones are a plus for the economy and which ones aren't.
Yeah, I think clearly when you're looking at this sector as probably the most dynamic sector of our economy, fastest growing, we're certainly in the keep moving phase as you laid out, and we want to make sure that continues. And I think there are certainly policy lessons to be learned when you look at some fundamental pieces that we've had in place here in the United States that has allowed this growth to happen and allowed so many dynamic companies to be born and grow here in the United States, where it's an incredible competitive advantage for us as we look to the future. I would say the internet's a great American export. And so we want to make sure that we don't change that or break that by changing some of the core fundamental policies that we have here in the United States that don't exist abroad. And so when you look at Europe and how the slow growth they've had, and it's hard probably to name a whole lot of internet companies that are born and growing in Europe or other parts of the world, what is it that we have here in the United States, right? We've gotten some things right on IP policy, on things like Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, other policy that we've had that have allowed such innovation to exist here in the United States. And as we're in the keep moving phase, if we allow ourselves to get to the stop moving piece, I think we'll be in big trouble, and we'll lose a lot of the advantages that we have in the United States that don't exist abroad.
Yeah. Does anybody in the audience have anything that they would like to ask this panel? If you do, speak up. If not, I'm going to keep going. Raise your hand if you do. Right here, yes, Rick Kessler. And I'll repeat the question. Right? How do we make sure the unbelievable opportunity that we've talked about? How do we get the inclusion of populations?
So that they too can participate in those opportunities. Because many of us wrote these regs 20-odd years ago, and now we're asking this new generation of policymakers.
So these regulations written years ago, how do we expand the people who are able to benefit from them? And I know one of those populations that Rick is talking about are disabled folks who the internet and automation, all the things that our technology companies have done, think about the opportunities that they've provided them, but not just disabled, minority communities. How do we expand that opportunity and think about that so that it's more broadly shared, as you all write about?
Yeah, I mean, one, I think it's clear that technology, particularly digital internet technology, is a great equalizer where it will allow disadvantaged communities, however you want to define that, to be able to compete with others and have advantage that they don't have. Even like a very simple thing, using the taxi example of being able to call a ride to you to meet your whatever needs you have. But also, like I mentioned, communities, as long as you have an internet connection and you're in anywhere in the country, you can build a global business and a business that can compete with anybody, and that wouldn't be possible without a number of these benchmark laws that we have on the books and without the digital economy.
So we're starting to see the broadening right now of who's benefiting. What happened is that for many years it seemed like the most beneficiaries were on the coast and higher educated people, and recently it's been broadening out to other parts of the country. It's been broadening out to people with a high school education. And I think that the sense of inequality that people had, growing inequality from tech, is actually starting to reverse at this point. I think this is really important as part of a natural process. It's part of a process of the internet benefits broadening out to the physical industries. And it's going to take a while for the politics and the perceptions to catch up with the reality, but it's actually happening right now. So we're in the interesting phase where when I talk to reporters and they say, e-commerce is destroying all these retail jobs. And I say to them, they weren't paid very much. They're getting better. They're getting much better paid jobs. And the growth, we're putting in place these projects that are adding jobs that have not seen projects of this size for 10 or 15 years. And they say, oh, wow, okay. And it just takes time for people to understand that the pendulum is swinging in a different direction at this point. It's swinging towards a broadening. And right, you look a little bit skeptical at this point, but it's in the data, and it's going to be increasingly in the data going forward.
Yes, Gator. Keep it short, because I've got to repeat everything that you're saying.
Okay. I'm a business owner in the manufacturing and industrial space.
So we've got a manufacturer here, yes?
And what I think we've actually seen over the last...
Oh, good. There's a microphone. That's what we needed.
And over the last couple of years, what we have seen is exactly what Michael and Bret are talking about, where due to, in part, implementing new information technology, I've seen productivity growths of 25, 30, 40% per employee.
Sign that man up.
In the niche businesses that I own, and what it's transforming into now is opportunity for me to pay, obviously, my employees more money because of those productivity growths. So I think that productivity transformation is starting to hit more traditional markets, but it's been it's a long process and a very one that's only at its very beginning.
That's great.
Yes.
I don't think you'll need to use the mic. My name's Jeff Phillips. I'm with Reserve Officers Association. That's what I want to read the paper.
Jeff Phillips from Reserve Officers Association.
I walked here.
Great.
Great location. My question regards the physical realm, manufacturing. I can understand how technology can vastly and see it dramatically increase employment and productivity in the services. But how does technology increase employment in a manufacturing facility that has robots, that has technology that I read is reducing the need for human beings?
Right.
Technology increase employment.
How does technology increase employment, not just productivity? We get it because there's displacement, yada, yada,
Let me do
yada.
a really fast version
Yes.
of this. Remember Henry Ford's plant? Henry Ford's plant was far more productive than any of the competitors. It also hired a lot more. And what happened was because they reduced prices. Now, I don't want to kind of go into the details here, but if you look at the data for manufacturing over the last 20 years, okay, in a lot of ways, productivity has not gone up in manufacturing, correctly measured. What's happened is that there's been a lot of changes. There's been a lot of, it's not as progressive as you think that it is. And you really want to sort of think about moving towards being able to have local manufacturing facilities, not having to sort of ship things 10,000 miles as the technology gets better, okay? And so what happens is you can sort of provide a lot of your needs from plants that are closer by, so you don't have to invest so much in transportation. And so, you know, it's going to be a very different world that we live in. But remember, history is on the side of productivity gains means growth.
Well, actually, I want you to ask the last question. Go ahead. Yes, there is a mic. It's coming.
Hi, I'm Patrice Onwuka with the Independent Women's Forum. Interested in the education skills gap for the jobs of the future. So, I mean, we're seeing lots of, particularly women who are in positions that are already being automated and eliminated. You know, what is it going to take for them to be able to have the jobs that are running this machinery and technology in these industries that are not necessarily full of technology yet?
So if you look just at fulfillment centers, these are industries where they require a high school education, but the main thing they require is a comfort in working with machinery, okay? And so I don't see a gender gap there, okay, in the end, which is that if you're comfortable working with technology, next to technology, sort of tech-enabled, then it's a job that's available to you. Now, I'm not going to get into the deep questions about what people prefer and what they don't prefer, because frankly, I don't think that's really important. I think in the end, if people have good jobs available to them, they're going to take them. And it's not ones that, you know, we're not talking about things that are coders or anything. We're sort of talking about the whole range of jobs.
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. And it's something that we all need to do better and also emphasize, you know, as companies and as, you know, the education system to make sure that young people today have the opportunities and skills they need for the economy of today and tomorrow. And it's something that we at the Internet Association have invested in heavily and worked on, from STEM and computer science programs, with after-school programs for middle school kids and high school, and something that just a few weeks ago we worked with the White House on an initiative to create computer science funding for K-12, both on a private sector pledge that we announced of over $300 million from a group of companies, and then also on the public sector side. And so it's something that we need to really emphasize and work on, and I think companies are taking it very seriously, and the government now is starting to do their part as well. So it's a great question.
And it's a great question to lead into our next panel on the future of work, what jobs will look like. I want you all to join me in thanking Michael, Bret, and Michael. Thank you, gentlemen. We really appreciate it.